let's start with the first story today. It was a big story that actually broke last night. It was carried by Finextra. They were citing the Financial Times. But the big story is about automated clearing houses in Europe. Now, before we get into the story, I've got to give you a bit of background to put the context together particularly for the UK, but the context also for the wider story. If you think back to the last Labour government, so back in the 1990s, Blair and Brown commissioned a report on banking services. It ended up being called the Cruikshank Review. It was by a guy called Dan Cruikshank, and he talked about lots of issues about payments and banking and control in the UK. The report was launched in 2000, but the bit of it's important for us today is where it talked about the BACS payment system, the clearinghouse in the UK that was processing payments, and it pulled out some issues around governance and ownership. And basically what it said, BACS Limited, its shareholders were the banks. And it's saying as part of the banks, there were then issue about how the banks controlled that payment system, the level of transparency there was or wasn't with that payment system, perhaps a lack of competition in payment systems, and also barriers to entry for new participants. Now, I'd argue on the new participant piece, the issue wasn't really about BACS and access to BACS. It was the fact if you didn't have a sort code, it cost you about £1 million to get one, let alone all the rest of the onboarding charges. But we'll put that to one side and we'll assume that what Cruikshank said was the right thing to do. So from a BACS point of view, we saw a split of BACS Limited into two companies, a payment system operator called BACS Payment Schemes Limited, and an infrastructure, the operator of the system, under contract to the payment system operator, confusingly initially called BACS Limited, then called VocaLink Limited, and then called VocaLink Limited. Now, I'll stop there at that point because there was another iteration we're going to get to in a moment. But what we saw with that separation, the banks still owned the shares, but we saw them divest. We saw them look to sell their shares in BACS Limited. As chief executive of the BACS Payment Schemes Limited, a number of potential suitors were brought to me. I remember sitting in the room now. I can't remember how many. I think I saw 3 or 4, something like that. And seeing them, it was like, did I have a problem? As the biggest contract that the organisation had was with me, would I foresee any issues or comments or concerns if they were to? I didn't really have any. It was up to them who they sold. There was no particular issue in terms of the continuing supply and continuity of supply and of ownership and all those sort of things. So we saw in 2017 the shareholders divest their shares of what was then called BACS Limited, but what we now as Voca and VocaLink, to MasterCard. Now, I did a quick trek on ChatGPT, and they report, or it's reported on there, that the price that MasterCard paid was $1.1 billion. Is that the figure? Don't know. That's what the internet tells me. And then we fast forward from 2017. We see at that point, we've seen the split of payment system operator and infrastructure provider. We've seen the divestment of the infrastructure provider away from the banks into another company. Now, whether we might regret that later on is irrelevant. That's what happened. And as part of that, we've seen that what Cruikshank was looking for had happened. We fast forward a couple of years to 2019, and Nets, a very similar organisation in Denmark, was then acquired by MasterCard. And again, the press tell us it was for a bigger sum, almost 3 times what they paid in the UK for VocaLink, what is now VocaLink Limited, US dollars 3.2 billion for the Nets system. So we saw at that point, that was perhaps the beginning of a strategy of MasterCard looking to be a real-time payments player, certainly in Europe, but probably as a precursor to around the world. But of course, the story that broke last night on Finextra, citing the Financial Times, is that very potentially or possibly MasterCard are looking to sell Nets over in Denmark. Now, we'll see what that means in the wider strategy for MasterCard in their play for real-time payments. You can see why they had that play in terms of a hedge against cards being disintermediated by open banking. We can perhaps, if we see that divestment, what does that mean for the wider strategy? Only they will know. But what does it mean in terms of their ownership and desire for VocaLink here in the United Kingdom, and what that might mean for payments? What might it mean for retail payments infrastructure? Remember, if retail payments infrastructure is your thing, make sure you visit newrpi.uk and you'll get our dedicated newsletter, which keeps you up to speed with the changes that are happening in our retail infrastructure rails. So in the wider story about whether or not Nets is sold, in the wider story of what that might mean for Vocalink in the UK, in the wider story of what that might mean for the future of retail payments infrastructure, right the way across the instant payments world, make sure you follow at payments-unpacked.com, because we're going to follow that story quite closely. Well, thank you for joining Payments Unpacked live on a Friday at 1 o'clock. We're on every time at 1 o'clock on a Friday. And I'm going to mention Jeremy Light in a moment, and he's just liked my post on LinkedIn. So that's interesting. So Jeremy, hold that. We'll come back. But if you've got a question, drop it in the comments below, and we'll see what you might ask. The second story today is about direct debits. We often cover direct debits here on Payments Unpacked Live. The reason it's been forefront of my mind and made one of the three stories for today is that I've been on a bit of a purge trying to get rid of direct debits out of my account. I've cancelled 2 BT direct debits. Great, changed internet provider. And I've cancelled a number of SIM card direct debits. So it's reduced the numbers of direct debits. But these days, cancelling the mandate in my banking app is super easy, super efficient, absolute confidence it works. It's very immediate. But of course, cancelling the mandate is not enough in itself. You have to think about cancelling the underlying contract behind it. And I've had a nightmare when I've cancelled a direct debit or wanted to cancel the underlying contract, even though I'm out of contractual period, ringing up, pushing 2 for this, 3 for that, having a conversation, them trying to get me a renegotiation to say, you know the drill. It's an absolute nightmare. But of course, you've got to break both the mandate and the contract for the goods and services, because if you don't, you'll end up the goods and services provider will be chasing you for money because you haven't paid it through your direct debit. Direct debit is perfect, of course, for subscriptions, and when you want that subscription to be in place, but obviously cancelling the provision of supply is a thing that's an issue. Request to pay should have given us a much better solution, but of course, as we know, request to pay certainly in the United Kingdom is dead, and maybe variable recurring payments or commercial VRPs particularly will play a part in terms of how we manage our subscriptions. But the reason that I'm explaining this story to you or giving you the background is because yesterday Visa issued a joint press release with a company called Pinwheel. I've not heard of Pinwheel. We've all heard of Visa, but it's a subscription product that they are launching in North America. And their research said that by 2030, there will be 12 billion subscriptions worldwide. 12 billion subscriptions. Remember, a subscription probably has 12 collections over the year, so you do the math. And in their research, that said that 75% of people want to manage both the payment mandate and the subscription in one place in a single app. And they said that 50% of millennials and Gen Z would actually switch their banks if their bank offered an in-app solution to deal with the whole subscription. Now, with those figures in mind, quite naturally, because of the press release, Visa and Pinwheel have issued a press release announcing their service that in one place then can manage both the mandate and the underlying service. Now, doing it singly in an app is fantastic. It's an all-in-one solution. The bad news is that it's only available in North America later this year, and there's no news on it coming to Europe / UK. But we're finally seeing solutions come together where I can manage the mandate and the underlying contract in one place. That would be a significant step forward for direct debits here in the UK. Well, my final story, thanks for joining in on this live broadcast. Great to see people joining. Make sure you share. If you're watching the replay, please share with your network. If you don't subscribe yet, please subscribe to payments-unpacked.com to our newsletter. But our final story was a guest blog we carried on Payments Unpacked this week from Jeremy Light. Jeremy's a great author. If you don't subscribe to his Agenda Payments newsletter, make sure that you subscribe. It's called Agenda Payments. You'll find it on Google. And the guest blog we carried this week was really about the world's first real-time, I should say near real-time, payment system. And if you know anything about payments, you'll know that the first near real-time payment system in the world was United Kingdom in 2008 when we saw faster payments. Now, often, particularly when I'm in the Middle East, or obviously I'm not there at the moment because of the issues, but when I'm in the Middle East and they're talking about payments, the central banks, the bankers will say, Mike, you're the granddaddy of all payment systems. Faster payments is the granddaddy of payment systems. And I say, yes, it is. It's fantastic. But I talk to you about how good it is as long as I can talk to you about the improvements I would like to see about it. But the point of the story is in 2 months today, faster payments in the UK comes of age. It will be 18 years old. What an amazing milestone. That coming of age is very significant. Now, if you're of a certain age, you won't know what life was like before faster payments in the UK. Can you imagine paying all your bills by cheque? Can you imagine writing a cheque and then a bank giro credit, putting the two together, and you don't even know what a bank giro credit is probably, but then queuing up at the bank to pay it in? Um, the BACS transfer took 3 days. It wasn't immediate. If I paid a standing order, whether I funded my savings account or paid my rent on a standing order, the banks took float for 2 days. If you don't know what float is, it's because when I was responsible for BACS and faster payments, I got rid of float in payments in the United Kingdom. We don't pay that, but what it means is the difference, but the interest earned on the difference between your account being debited and the beneficiary receiving their amount. 3 days, interest, the banks held it. I managed to get rid of that with transfer of standing orders from BACS into faster payments. The last example of that. But when we went to faster payments, it was really a step into the unknown. As a country, as a banking industry, as a payments industry, we didn't know really how it would work and what would happen. It was a step into the unknown. We played with Ellie first, early, late, early. You give me the file this morning and I'll pay it this afternoon. You give me the file this afternoon, I'll pay it tomorrow. That was pushed to one side. We'd have been much poorer without Ellie than we are with faster payments. I guess from my point of view, I bid to be the first chief executive operator, the payment system operator of faster payments. I failed in that bid. It went to Chaps Clearing Company. A few years later, I became the CEO of Chaps Clearing Company, and I split out faster payments and formed its own company called Faster Payment Schemes Limited. Obviously, faster payments and BACS are now part of Pay.uk. But BACS or faster payments were transformed. It transformed how we pay, who we pay, and when we pay. And if you knew life before faster payments, you'd really understand that. If you never use those mechanisms, you're only in faster payments now, you're benefiting on the blood, the sweats, the tears, the investment of the industry to provide faster payments. So I've mentioned that faster payments eradicated float, the last issue of float in the UK. It has digitized analog payments, so paying checks and cash. Imagine going out for a pizza last night. I owe you a tenner. Tomorrow morning, if I don't see you, how do I get that tenner to you? Do I put it in an envelope and send it to you? Do I come around your house and give it to you? Pay it by faster payments and send it through. If only if we had things like PayM, but that's another story. But also faster payments, sped up payments. No longer will we subject to the BACS clearing cycle that offers simultaneous debit and credit on the day of value, but as a processing cycle to get us to that point. So it allowed us to have payments sped up. Now, they're the things we knew and we know now, but of course, those faster payments rails are providing us with the bedrock for open banking. Now, whether it's an account-to-account open banking, it won't be a request to pay, whether it's a variable recurring payment. But the rails that we have for faster payments, despite the fact that we haven't changed them since we started in 2008, provide us with the underlying functionality we need to enable payments to be made for open banking. So we launched faster payments in 2008. We didn't really know what we were going to get. We found all the things around flow, around use cases, and what we didn't know is it would also be the bedrock for open banking, which is quite amazing. So get ready, because in 2 months' time, I'm going to ask you to raise a glass to faster payments coming of age on its 18th birthday. There are three stories for today. My screen's gone a little bit funny, so if I've missed a comment or a message, I do apologise. I hope I'm live streaming. We'll see. I'm sure I am. Substack's very cool. Make sure you subscribe at payments-unpacked.com. You'll find Payments Unpacked live here on Substack, live every Friday at 1 o'clock. Typically, we'll have 3 stories, up-to-the-minute stories, live stories, unscripted, unedited, just a couple of notes to try and make sure I don't forget anything. But in the meantime, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.